one.
How do you think the war outcome would have differed if the U.S. did not end up getting involved?
I kind of think we might be speaking German now. I really don't know, Alex. It's hard to tell, but I think the United States just felt like they had to step up and do something. I mean, we were under attack after all. Not personally in this country, but it could have happened.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay, did you have any family members serve during the time of the war? And if so, what was their experience like?
my mother had 3 brothers in the service, and my dad had 1. And one of my mother's brothers, well, none of them actually talked about it when they got home, but I had one uncle that as I grew up, I realized that every time I was around him, whether it was with the family members or whatever, anytime we walked into a building, my uncle always walked in first. I mean, in front of his wife, in front of his mother, in front of anybody, he walked in first. But it wasn't until I was grown that I realized the reason he did that was because when he was in Europe, he was in the infantry, and his job was to roust out German soldiers that had taken over these little villages, and they were in the homes of the villagers, and it was his job to go into these homes and eliminate the Nazi shell soldiers. So after the war, he never let anybody walk into a building in front of him. He always went in first.
Okay, since your family is German, was there any experience in German discrimination growing up at that time?
Yeah. Well, my father's family was German, and as a matter of fact, I learned to bless myself in German before I knew how to do it in English. And I remember one time, my mother was a very gentle woman. She never spanked me, except once I can remember. The house that we lived in had a very large side yard that fronted on the street. And I was out there by myself, and all of a sudden my mother grabbed me by the back of my sweater, and she dragged me into the house, and she put a whack on my butt like I had never ever had been spanked like that. What I was doing was parading up and down the side yard, which I said fronted on the street, with the Nazi salute and saying, Heil Hitler, Heil Hitler. I had been seeing that in the movies the movie theater was just a few doors from the house. And I'm sure my mother was scared to death that maybe neighbors had seen me doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But I never did it again.
Okay, is there anything else that you would like to add or share?
One thing I do remember that I was very impressed with during the war was every time one of my mother's brothers or my dad's brother would come home from the service, my mother and I would get on a streetcar, and we would go to Union Station in downtown St. Louis to meet the soldiers coming in. And I remember one time seeing armed soldiers marching, seemed like hundreds, probably wasn't that many, but a multitude of Japanese through the Union Station. And of course at the time, Japanese were, that was the enemy as far as I was concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Of course I know now and knew later that they were just actually Americans that were being put into camps somewhere. But anyway, I mentioned to you earlier about to buy sugar. This is what you needed.
Oh, wow.
You needed that to buy a bag of sugar. They were also for meat. You couldn't buy, that's why we ate so much Spam, because you couldn't get much meat either. But, and I don't know how they came about. I don't know if they mailed them to us or if my mother had to go somewhere to pick them up. I just haven't the faintest idea. But anyway, times were tough.
How long did you have to use those for?
We did it, I think, for the whole war.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. And in school, we had a cardboard, it was a piece of cardboard that had slots in it, and the slots were for dimes. And you would bring your dimes to school, and when this card was filled, a war bond was purchased. You had to preserve all your metal, and when you opened a can of whatever, you had to take the ends of it, cut the ends of it out, put the ends into the can, put it on the floor, and stomp it flat.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all collected separately to go for the war. I mean, they needed metal for whatever it was they were making.
How was school different after the war began? Was that like the main focus? Like the war and stuff?
After the war?
During
the war? Oh, yeah. It was, yeah. I mean, I don't recall that the teachers ever particularly saying too much about it, except that, kids, we need your dimes to buy, to buy the war bonds. But my family, it was always, the subject was always there, because your relatives talked about it, your mother and dad's friends talked about it. It was just a topic of conversation, constantly.
Is it, the war as a whole, is it something that you're glad that you got to experience? Were you do you think it was good that you got to go through that growing up? That it was such a big part?
Oh, yeah, it probably helped me in a lot of ways. I'm a very frugal person, which you probably already suspected. But because we had to be.
Mm-hmm.
We had to be. So in that respect, it was a good lesson, I guess. Yeah.
What was it like when the war was over? Was it like a big celebration, or was it?
I vividly remember the day. I was I was in the backyard, and church bells were just constantly ringing. Horns were honking. I mean, it was just all the noise you could possibly imagine. Everybody was just so excited. And I remember standing in the yard and crying. I was so happy.
How old were you?
7.
When it ended?
I was only a year old when it started.
Mm-hmm.
But I was 7 when it ended.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's...
Anyway, thanks, Alex.
Thank you for joining me with this interview.
Thank you. Love you.
Love you too.
Bye-bye.